great tool. Just remember that black erases and white basically brings it back. And you could add curves to any layer that's in this layer box. If you want to get rid of something just ever so slightly, you can do that. So curves are great.
Awesome. Our next question is from Josh Golden. Josh asks, what is your method for taking an image from black and white to color, and which layer modes, etc., do you use?
That has always been a struggle for me. One of the things about black and white images is that in these dark areas, like that you see in the kind of little painting that I'm doing right now, there's not really an easy way to just bring color into the dark areas and the really light areas. The middle gray values, like the 30 to 70% grays, those can absorb some color. So let me just, for example, maybe go into soft light with this really loud orange color right over here. Okay. Now you can see that in some layer modes, like in soft light and overlay, you could see how they treat the colors differently. That's on top of the gray. The color comes out a little bit differently. So it's almost a matter of trying to find the right layer setting, to bring out some of the color. One of the things that I really do, though, is that I will do a little bit of some of this overlay painting. Let me see if I can do some of it right now. I'll do a little bit of this just to establish maybe, okay, it's maybe like a really hot day, it's going to be a really, really warm palette. And then from there, once I'm able to understand maybe a little bit of where it's going, I'll maybe throw in a little bit of cooler tones, maybe into the shadow, some of the blues. But see, automatically right here, you can kind of tell that it's been painted on top of a black and white image. You don't really get that pure color, okay? So from there, what I would do is I would jump right on top of that overlay setting. I'd basically stop trying to use the layer settings to throw in color, but now I'd come in and actually paint, maybe looking at maybe some reference as well, start painting with just a good old brush and opaque color on top of it. So now I would be able to get a little bit more of that nice, saturated color that I wanted and things like that. Also, one thing that you could see, if I turn off these curves, where the lighter layers, where the lighter values are, you can now see that there is some color in this area. If we kind of look at it right here, but once I kind of draw up that color, if I go really, really light, you see how that white doesn't absorb any of that color? That's going to be the problem with painting on top of black and white, is the more extreme light and darks aren't going to absorb any color. So that's why I'll just do a really, really quick kind of study, just throwing on some base color, and then on top of that, start drawing it up again.
Thanks, James. Our next question is from Todd. Todd asks, he says, hello, James. After you do the photo overlay, you go to curves and make it darker. Then are you doing the layer mask on that layer, or do you add another layer with a color and erase work on that? So I think you kind of went over that, but if you can quickly, I guess, recap it, would be great.
Yeah, understanding how a photo or some kind of texture is going to work onto your piece is going to be really, really important. There's not always an exact formula of how I, kind of use texture and use the mask and curves. After some practice, you kind of understand maybe a certain type of texture is always going to work, maybe within a certain way, but sometimes there's not really always an exact formula. But what I do try to do is, anytime I'm throwing on some kind of texture, it could even be from this painting over here. If I'm, wanting to maybe go into lighten or into overlay, immediately what I'm going to do is throw on a new mask by hitting this button over here. Once I'm on that mask, it's the same practice of using black and white to get rid of and add to it. So that's pretty much about it.
Okay. Our next question is from Don. And Don, if you're there, you didn't tell me if you had a mic or not. So I'm going to, okay, he says no mic. So Don's question is, are there any disadvantages in starting with black and white, then taking it to color?
The only disadvantage that I would see is, number one, it is going to take a little bit more time than if you did start directly in color. I know that when I was working at NCSoft, prior to working at NCSoft, I worked everything with, doing a black and white study, then maybe doing a couple of color keys, and then, having the art director approve one, and then taking it to final color. That process took a very, very long time, and if sometimes you're under the gun, you don't always have that luxury to have all that time. At NCSoft, we were in a blue sky phase working on the Guild Wars 2 project. The art director had basically put the task upon all of the concept artists to do a number of paintings per day, and we were actually producing 5 paintings per day. And if you're doing 5 paintings a day, there's no way that I would be able to do a black and white study, a color key, and then paint it and do that 5 times within 8 hours. It was just very unrealistic. So we started to really push ourselves to just jump into color immediately. So once I started to jump into color immediately, I've noticed that the richness of color and the actual illustration itself came out much more vibrant and alive than putting color on top of black and white. So the number one thing, though, is that if you have a very, very solid understanding of values, then jumping into color is going to be a bit easier. But the whole understanding of color is just, it takes a lot of practice and studying, and I don't feel I'm an expert at color right now, and so it takes a lot of practice. And if I did have the option of saying start black and white or start in color, I would always start in color.
Awesome. Our next question is from James O'Shea. James, if you're there, I don't see if you told me you had a mic or not. So I'm going to activate your mic. Are you there, James?
Hello?
James?
Hello?
We can barely hear you. Can you speak a little louder to your mic? Closer?
Hello?
Hello, James?
Hello?
Okay, James, we can barely hear you, so I'll ask the question on your behalf. Sorry about that. James asked, what kind of exercises would you recommend students do to get a better understanding of believability in your work?
I think that's going to be, I think one of the things that helped me out a lot in that was actually going out and just drawing, going out onto locations. I had a class where we'd go to museums, we'd go to parks, and we'd go to, arboretums and like military museums and all sorts of things. And we just go out there and we draw. We draw for a good, 5-6 hours. And one of the things that was really good about that was, you're there and observing. You want to be able to capture the overall image itself, but at the same time, you want to start concentrating on little tidbits and areas that were really interesting to you. So getting believability it's going to take practice.